Self-awareness, the inner compass. The hardest emotional intelligence strategy, admitting our brutal truth. No mask, no fear, with courage. Face it to thrive, to reborn free. We tell ourselves we are rational beings, evidence-driven, deliberate, in control. That is what we strive to be on a daily basis. The truth, quieter, more dangerous, is that many of our worst moves come from unexamined feeling. Fear pretending to be prudence. Pride wearing the mask of confidence. Desire posing as vision. Leaders who burned reputations, brilliant minds who self-sabotaged, institutions that crashed. They were not betrayed by intellect. They were betrayed by the invisible forces in the body and the unspoken stories in the mind. Self-awareness is not a luxury or a feel-good management hack. It is the inner compass. Without it, intellect becomes vanity, courage becomes recklessness. Now listen closely, and this is where practice meets profit. The compass you learn to read in the dark is the very instrument we will hand to the algorithm. Does not use the polite grammar of boardrooms or the measured tempo of seminars. It speaks in storms. A fine, slow rain becomes a torrent. A tremor becomes an earthquake. And inside that noise, before the charts, before the council, before the polite prescriptions, a private sky opened and spoke to me in lightning. How the inner compass becomes algorithmic gold. You will recognize the moment if you have had it. It is the point when the map you have been using, the map made of other people's expectations, ancestral scripts, career benchmarks, applause, falls short. For me, migration was that rupture. To leave a place is to be unstitched from the identity someone else recognized for you. You arrive in a new language with the same old questions and far fewer answers. Who am I if not the sum of the institutions that recognized me? In the quiet that follows, the psyche becomes a workshop. You spend nights reassembling a self from fragments, memory, culture, family law, shame, triumphs that no longer have the same currency. Identity crisis is not a pathology, it is the raw material of reinvention. It forces honesty because there is no neat external scaffolding to hide behind. You must choose a self. When I use the word compass now, I mean something very particular, not a sentiment to tuck into a blog post, not a management platitude to tick off in a keynote, but an instrument you read with the same care as a star chart when the horizon has been rearranged. The compass I learned to trust was not handed to me in a classroom or by a mentor with a neat CV. The compass arrived in the hush of loneliness after migration, after illness, after failure, after losing a loved one, after losing yourself, in the punctured afternoons of convalescence, in the long accrual of study and small defeats that, if I was honest, had always been the curriculum I secretly wanted. I had spent decades building myself like a project, studying, testing, failing, returning to texts at 3 a.m. until the idea stuck to me. I fitted myself with languages, with methods, with tools. I became my own laboratory. And the first discovery in that laboratory was blunt. Suffering is a teacher, and self-awareness its syllabus. When illness arrived, my own rhymed and precise crisis, it taught me another layer of that same maturational process. The doctor's language was clinical, the conversations practical. Yet in me, another conversation roared, guilt for slowing down, the odd shame of needing help, an almost instinctive bargaining with pride. Do not let them see you fail, the early voice had murmured through the years. Keep the public catalogue intact. There was a moment when I almost returned to work too quickly simply to prove that the myth of continuity still held. That near move was a test case in what I now teach as emotional alchemy. If your choices in crisis are made to preserve a narrative rather than to sustain truth, they will be brittle. You will fracture under the next load. You learn, slowly, that the self is a muscle. You work it out. The cures are not glamorous. They are repetitive rituals. A morning of reading, a notebook full of ugly lines, small walks where you breathe with intention, the discipline of saying what you feel aloud. I am afraid. I am ashamed. I am tired, until naming removes some of the power of the storm. The neuroscience confirms what practice and prayer had always suggested. Naming calms the amygdala. The prefrontal cortex reasserts itself. Decisions stop being reflexive reenactments of ancient shame and begin to be considered responses. Antonio Damasio called them somatic markers. The body flags a path before the conscious mind catches up. But we are not helpless to that flagging. We learn to translate it, to treat tremor and tightness as data rather than as orders. This is the maturational arc I ask you to consider. Solitude becomes reflection. Reflection becomes interrogation. Interrogation becomes discipline. Discipline becomes artistry. I studied for long years, books, philosophies, the liturgy of different epistemologies, because I wanted to be fluent across languages of thought. That learning was practical. I learned to read the cultural cues in a boardroom and the moral grammar in a community meeting. But it was also personal. In study, you discover how fragile your certainties are. You must remake them, translate them, give them new contours. You learn not to cling to one lineage, not to take tradition as a chain you must carry unmodified into the future. Instead, you let tradition be a set of materials to be woven anew, a new ritual, a new ethic that draws on religion, on art, on modern political thinking. Migration forced me to do that consciously. I redefined my parameters, my culture, my religion, not by renouncing what belonged to me, but by selecting, again and again, those truths that expanded rather than confined. This process is fertilized by solitude. Loneliness, if you let it be, teaches you how to be with yourself, how to witness without rehearsing a performance. I turned loneliness into an apprenticeship in self-observation. I learned to watch my mind like an ocean liner, see what surfaces, note how currents carry me towards old stories. In those loneliest hours, I wrote mantras that would shape my practice. Pain is ore, I am the furnace. Help is not debt, it is alliance. I repeat them sometimes as liturgy. Repetition forces interior architecture into habit. Say a line until it shapes a muscle. In time, the new muscle begins the small work of moving the body differently in the world. You must do more than confess. You must systematize practice. This is where self-awareness moves from introspection to strategy. I did not only write, I designed tests. I I turned private reflection into public instruments, a self-awareness matrix that mapped triggers to beliefs to behaviors, a 30-day inner audit that asked the same 5 questions every day until the mind could no longer evade them, small public rituals in teams, the check-in that is not performative but structural. These were not invented for show. They were born of necessity, the necessity to convert the private grammar of emotion into something collective that could be examined, measured, shared, and taught. Maturation demands stories. We tell ourselves stories about our lives, of loss, exile, failure, and return, and these narratives frame how we orient forward. The great lives we study as examples are often stories of alchemical maturation. Nelson Mandela, who said, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it," turned confinement into a curriculum of patience and moral imagination. Viktor Frankl, from the abyss of Auschwitz, distilled a radical insistence. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Steve Jobs, cast out and later reborn at Apple, said plainly that getting fired was the best thing that could have happened to me. These quotes are not aphorisms, they are evidence of a process: suffering, reflection, reorientation, and then teaching. Their genius lay not only in resilience, but in the way they transformed their scars into a strategy that shaped others. We can make this intimate. I ask you now, what are your scars? Not to fetishize pain, but to inventory gifts disguised as wounds. Perhaps it is exile, as it was for me. You were not merely uprooted, you were dereferenced. That void called you into authorship. You had to decide who you were independent of a place. Perhaps it is loss, a relationship that ended, a career that collapsed, an illness that rewired your ambitions. These breaks are invitations to a new grammar. They ask you to refine the voice that will narrate your next chapter. There is a practical grammar to that refinement. First, name the wound historically in a journal. Write it out fully, the year, the scene, the senses. Second, ask 2 corollary questions. What did this demand of me then? And what does it allow me to build now? The first reveals the competence imposed by trauma, patience, speed, vigilance, empathy, skills you may have gained without crediting them as such. The second converts those competencies into IP, workshops, diagnostics, frameworks, a course. That is where the personal meets the professional. That is where alchemy becomes product. This does not make you transactional. I want to be clear about that because some will hear productize your pain and recoil. We are not turning grief into commodity alone. We are translating embodied knowledge into forms that teach others how to navigate similar crucibles. That translation requires generosity and rigor. It requires that you refine the wound into a replicable practice, one that others can test. For me, that practice is the power matrix, EEQ, AIQ, SSQ, a triad that names 3 capacities leaders require in our eras of algorithmic acceleration and ecological fragility. EEQ keeps ethics at center as we scale influence. AIQ teaches how to harness machine assistance without surrendering judgment. SSQ binds community commitments with durable strategy. These are not buzzwords. They are the scaffolding I teach and the product I offer. They were grown from scars. You will ask, where does the audience come in? How do we make them see themselves in our story? That is the work of voice. I speak in the second person in many places, you, because identity matures in relation. You are not alone in your dislocation. We are a collective of workers, migrants, exiles, survivors, dreamers. When I tell the story of my clinic and my mantras, I do so for you to hear them reflected in your own throat. I want you to feel the knot in your chest ease, because the narrative I present aligns with something you have felt, perhaps shamed, perhaps unspoken. Identification is the first step toward communal practice. If you feel, yes, that is me, the story has done its primary job. The second step is invitation. We will practice together. We will take the compass and test it by doing the work publicly. The maturational process is both personal and civic. In my community work, in the workshops I run, I see the translation at scale. A leader who learns to name fear before making a public statement is likely to hold moral credibility when an AI model makes an error. A politician who has walked through exile and reassembled identity stands more chance of forging inclusive narratives than someone whose identity is untested. We become not only resilient individually, but less fragile collectively. Our institutions, too, can be designed to absorb shocks rather than amplify them. That is the end goal, to convert private alchemy into public architecture. There is a timing in maturation. It is not immediate. You cannot schedule depth the way you schedule a launch. You prepare, you labor, you let time do its slow refining. This is why study matters, why I spent long years in disciplines that might have seemed tangential to immediate success. Philosophy teaches you how to interrogate assumptions. Literature teaches you how to live with ambiguity. Science gives you a method for testing hypotheses. Combined, they become a curriculum for the kind of leadership that holds when complexity rises. My studies were not an elite hoarding of knowledge, but a disciplined accumulation of tools for decision-making. When crisis came, I could call on a wide set of languages and translate the storm into a set of experiments. That is maturational craft. I want to give you, now, a set of practices that are simple and relentless. They are the exercises I use to build the compass. Daily naming. Each morning, write 3 sentences. Name 1 fear, 1 shame, 1 hunger. Don't argue. Record. Repeat. Naming is not wallowing. It is cartography. 30-minute weekly audit. Choose 1 decision you made that week that felt off. Map it in the self-awareness matrix. What emotion ran it? What belief did it protect? Who benefited? Who lost? Make 1 redesign. The public experiment. Pick 1 piece of your story to make public in a controlled way. A 5-minute video, a newsletter paragraph, a workshop module. Watch reactions, gather data. Refine. Teach to learn. Convert the competence you gained from a scar into a workshop or a checklist. Teach it to 3 people. Teaching forces you to formalize tacit knowledge. Ritualized pause. Before any high-stakes decision, take 60 seconds. Breathe. Name the tide. Ask, is this action for image or for truth? Then decide, these are not tricks. They are muscle training. They are the regimen of maturation. There is hard truth and there is tender truth here. The hard truth is that not every wound will translate into advantage. Some injuries will leave us limping. The tender truth is that even limping has its wisdom. Limping teaches us route selection. It teaches us to avoid unnecessary detours. It teaches us to allocate energy to what matters. If you spend your life hiding the limp, you will wear yourself down. If you make the limp legible, you can design an architecture that includes it. I will not pretend the path is solitary. My maturation was knotted with teachers, with fierce friends, with therapists and strangers who read my work and replied with their own confessions. Community is not optional. The self-work I advocate multiplies only in networks. We learn to hold each other's mirrors. When I published pieces from my video books and my manifestos, people wrote back, "Your scar gave me permission to ask for help." That is the social alchemy we aim for. Private truth made public to generate permission for others. We are living in an age where authenticity compounds on platforms. The algorithm does its part. It rewards retention, depth, and repeatable content. But platforms are only amplifiers. They will not replace the underlying work. If you intend to scale your voice, do so only after you have done the work. Manufacture nothing. The algorithm can magnify truth. It can also multiply artifice. Your edge is not contrivance but credibility. Credibility is a byproduct of maturational practice. It is earned.so. This is my instruction to you. Treat yourself as a project worth years. Read widely. Fail often. Build rituals that make you accountable to discomfort. Use solitude as a studio, not a prison. Turn your loneliness into the soil of reflection. Transform your identity crisis into a curriculum for redefinition that blends religion, culture, tradition, an amalgam rather than a division. Invent ceremonies for the self. Write a note to the part of you that survived. Light a small ritual lamp for each milestone. Create a template for apology and a template for acceptance. These are practical moves that convert vulnerability into architecture. And when you are ready, tell the story. Tell it short, then longer. Publish a long-form piece that holds attention, then slice it into short mantras that seed platforms. Part 2 is coming. Watch it. It means a lot for me. Subscribe, share, care, comment. See you for another conversation.